Well, thank you all so much for being here this evening. It is last year I met obviously a great many people who were considering the Heights, and so many of them said, "Gosh, it's so great that you guys are open." And every time I heard that, I thought to myself, "Well, we're kind of open because we missed you parents so very much," and so it's a really moving thing to now be here together once again. So now we're really open. Special thanks to our parents, primary educators. You are our co-conspirators for the good of your sons and our students. It's awesome to be back with you after this brief Heights lecture hiatus. Zoom just ain't the same. What a marvelous adventure the past year has been. Welcome also guests. This community is very much our family, and so we're delighted to bring you into our home. Before I welcome our headmaster, a few very quick thank yous. Mr. Tom Royal, Assistant Headmaster of the Heights, thank you for bringing this tradition to our school way before TED Talks were a thing. Mr. Royals has been opening up the school for speakers and filling coolers with ice, shutting down the party for 4 decades. It's a remarkable witness of hospitality, and this whole thing started with him, so thank you, Tom. Thanks also to the Heights lecture team. It is true that this work is just hanging out with a couple hundred of our best friends, but I'm still grateful for your Saturday evenings. Mike and Teresa Kim, thank you very much for the incredible spread at the entrance, all the food and the beverages. The Kims have been doing this now for 6 years, since their son was in 8th grade. He graduated 2 years ago, and they're just a great example of the fact that relationships at the Heights don't end just because your son gets his diploma. All the little touches that you add to the evening are a huge deal. So thank you very much, Mike and Teresa. Not sure where you are. They're probably still out front watching, so thank you. And speaking, they're probably in the living room. So speaking of the living room, our thanks to the people in the living room right now watching this streamed. If I were still a 21-year-old parent, I would probably be there. You didn't register. You're right next to the bar, and you can heckle the headmaster as much as you want. So. Not a bad place to be. So why a Heights lecture series? We meet tonight with drinks in hand again to engage in a conversation. We are a community that's united by a love of your sons and our students and the pursuit of their full maturity, the fulfillment of their calling to be men fully alive depends on our friendship and on our conversation. So we pursue that friendship tonight here. In a really wonderful way. I'd be remiss if I didn't point out in this Heights lecture vein that our lower school head, Colin Gleason, will give a lecture on respectful dominion, disciplining our young sons in November. I myself hope to share some thoughts with you in February on the renewal of the village, promoting a shared culture among families of families. Our speaker tonight epitomizes what he will speak about, which is optimism. Indeed, this is likely based on his experience of watching thousands of boys grow into men. A case in point, he knew his lower school head and his admissions director when any possibility of either of them speaking in public about concepts like discipline, authority, or culture would have been totally ridiculous. Alvaro is a graduate of the Heights class of 1983, Georgetown undergrad and Georgetown Law. He's been headmaster since 2002. I can attest that his most important work is teaching and mentoring your sons and mine. Tonight, he'll talk to us about optimism. Modern man, the quote goes, listens more willingly to witnesses than to teachers. And if he does listen to teachers, it's because they are witnesses. And Mr. Vicente witnesses what he preaches with regard to optimism. One case in point was the summer before the 2020-21 academic year. I think we all remember it quite well. As a team of faculty began and ended its summer planning for an entirely and utterly unpredictable year, facing conflicting government guidance, doing something very few were doing during a sensitive and complicated time when we missed your sons desperately. As we looked over the falls that we were about to shoot in a raft rigged up chiefly for its flexibility, the headmaster was known to say time and time again, "This should be fun." Parents, it was fun. And it was fun because of you. So it's only fitting that we all now together join together once again to welcome our headmaster, Mr. Alvaro de Vicente.
Thank you for that intro. And I must say that I think the fun in any adventure is provided by the company. So when you have good faculty, you have good parents, really everything else is just details. Sometimes more of them than others, but just details. The talk this evening is on hope and optimism. And it's a great topic because in some ways I think it's very natural. Maybe to some of us it could be temperamental, I suppose. For some of us it may be a lecture that seems superfluous. For others, maybe a lecture that seems too idealistic. But hopefully, whether you're in one or the other camps, you'll find some usefulness in what I'm going to say this evening. And to begin, I'd just like to define a little bit what we mean by hope and optimism. So hope is a feeling of expectation and desire for a certain thing to happen. It is a feeling of trust. It is to want something to happen or be the case. Right? Hope is a feeling, a desire that something is going to happen. Optimism is defined as hopefulness and confidence about the future or the successful outcome of something. Right? So a confidence of a successful outcome. So when talking about hope and optimism this evening, I don't want to talk about it as something passive, a passive desire, not the hope of somebody who says, oh, I hope I didn't fail that test after taking it. That's a passive desire. I just hope that things work out. But rather it's more of a purposeful action. I hope to make the team next year. Right? The difference is that the first one is passive. It's out of my hands. I hope I didn't fail. Let the gods of grading take care of me. The second one is a purposeful action, right? I hope to make the team, which implies I have to work towards that, and there's something I can do. So hope and optimism then involves actions that are necessary but insufficient. Actions that are not going to determine the outcome, but will certainly contribute to the outcome. Is to want something to happen and have the confidence that it will happen. So if that's what we mean by hope and optimism, at least this evening, then the question is, well, what exactly are we hoping for, right? What is it that we're expecting or have some confidence that will happen? And what we're talking about is that we hope, you as parents and we as educators hope that your sons will grow to be loyal, courageous, prudent, God-fearing men of service. If they do that, they will be optimistic. If they're optimistic, they're more likely to be those kind of men. And when we say that, we don't say it passively. Well, I hope that happens. But we say it from the point of view of we are confident that with our efforts, even though they're insufficient, they're necessary, and they will bear the fruit that we're expecting. That also means that we trust and are confident that the environment in which your sons are growing up makes it possible for them to be really good men. And that's where our trust has to come in. That the environment in the DMV in 2021 makes it possible for your sons to grow to be men who love God and men who love their families and who are loyal to their friends and they're good workers. I propose that I actually think that the environment in which we are now is a good environment for your sons to grow that way with our efforts and with our purposeful action. So to contemplate the outcome, right, well-formed young men, you have to know the reality in which that would happen, the environment. There is a distinction between hope and self-deception. Right? It depends on the accuracy of the grasping reality that we have. We need to know the context in which your sons grow up, so that we need to know that in that context, the outcome that we are confident will happen will take place. If somebody is totally clueless and he thinks, oh, everything is going to be okay, that person is not hopeful. He's just clueless. Right? He thinks it's going to be okay because he does not consider the reality. He really doesn't know what's going on. He doesn't realize all the dangers and challenges around him. So that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about somebody who understands the challenges and the reality and all the dangers. He sees all the ugly side of the culture, and yet he's filled with confidence that that boy is going to grow into a good man. So there are two ways to give into this self-deception, two ways in which somebody could be clueless. The first one, and the most obvious one, is to be ignorant of the factual reality around us. Right? The person who thinks, you know what, the culture here is very Christian, is very loving. If I just let my boy go anywhere within the DMV, he will be, by osmosis, infused with all kinds of Christian virtues. Right? That would be ignoring reality. Right? I think to form my son into being a really good man, I'm just going to tell him, listen, go into the internet and look at whatever you want because everything there is good. Right? And whatever you find there, you can follow that advice. That would be ignoring reality. That's one way in which we can deceive ourselves. So let's look at some of that reality. I was trying to figure out, okay, how do I talk about this reality in the DMV or in our country? I said, well, let me look at four areas that I could argue these are areas that are thermometers of the health of a culture. Marriage, priestly vocations, church attendance, and mental illness. So the good news is that in the last 20 years, the divorce rate has gone down in the United States. Now, it's also true that the marriage rate has also declined over the same time period. So it may not be that marriages are actually stronger. It may just be that they don't happen as often. Right? They don't break up because people don't even bother to get married in the first place. Priestly vocations. In the last 50 years, from 1970 to the present, there has been a 38.5% decline in the number of ordinations. In that same time period, there's a 40% decline in the number of total priests. Right? So we have 40% fewer priests now than we did in 1970. Right? No wonder that sometimes it's hard to get to a mass, right, or find confession. And in some ways, we're a mission territory, and we see priests from other countries coming here to do some mission work, and maybe they're in our neighborhood. Now, the good news is that over the last 20 years, the number of ordinations have gone up 12%. So even though they're down 30% in 50 years, the last 20 years they're up 12%, right? There's an upswing going on now. And that the number of priests has only gone down about 20% in the last 20 years. Right? So you see there are a lot more young priests coming in, and very good priests. And the number, even though still declining overall, but it's not as steeply as it was before. But what about church attendance? Among Catholics, we have a 39% weekly attendance to Mass nationwide. In 2008, we were at 45%. Right? So we've gone down from 45 to 39 in the last 13 years. In the 1950s, it was at 75%. Right? So it really went down from the 50s down to the early 2000s. Now, here's the thing that is interesting, that among those aged 21 to 29, so this is the group that just came out of college, right, for the first 80 years, young professionals, 25% attend Mass weekly. 1 out of 4 Catholics in that age group actually goes to Mass weekly. Among Protestants, 45% attend weekly service, and that number has been basically unchanged since the 1950s. Right, it's been around 45% ever since. And instead of 25%, 36% of 21 to 29-year-old Protestants attend weekly services. Now, the other interesting statistic there, of course you can do whatever with all these numbers, is that the percentage of Americans who identify as Protestant has gone down from 71% in the 50s to 47% now. Right, so there's a significant reduction in numbers. Those who compare as Catholic are 22%, which is basically the number that has been for the last 50 years. But the reason that has stayed in the 20s is because of immigration, in the case of Catholics. Younger adults, so the young professionals, 21 to 29-year-olds, 33% identify as having no religion whatsoever. That's a significant number. So there are more young professionals who claim they have no religion whatsoever than those who claim that they are Catholic. Let's look at mental illnesses. In 2019, 20% of adults in the U.S. had some type of mental illness, and 5% had what is called a serious mental illness, that is somewhat incapacitating. In the case of adolescents, high school students, those with any kind of mental disorder, 50%. Now, that includes, that also in there, I'm pretty sure, not 100% sure, but I'm pretty sure they include everything, including learning differences and so forth, right? But it's still a significant number. This is more interesting in my mind. Of the 50% who have any kind of mental illness or mental disorder, 22% have a severe impairment. That's more serious, right? So that's high school students who really can't function that well because of some mental issue. And finally, just to get you into more reality and perhaps depress a little bit more before we go into hope and optimism, suicide was the second leading cause of death among individuals between the ages of 10 and 34, right? That's also very significant. So that is the reality. And I claim we have to be hopeful and optimistic, even though that is the factual reality. We cannot ignore that, because otherwise we would be clueless. So this leads me to the second reason why sometimes we deceive ourselves, right? The first one being that we ignore reality as is, what I call factual reality. The second one is that we view reality as only the factual reality, as those numbers. A symphony is much more than a group of individuals playing various notes perfectly. There's an intangible thread that happens between all the musicians to make it into a symphony, and not just notes that they're playing. A team sometimes is much better than the players on that team seem to be on paper. It's just the chemistry between them. It's the coaching, it's the relationships, the interaction, the desire of individuals to sacrifice more than other people because of those intangible reasons. So reality is more than the facts, it's more than numbers. It's interactions, motivation, leadership. There's a famous Japanese saying that says, vision without action is a dream. Action without vision is a nightmare, right? Vision without action is a dream. Action without vision is a nightmare. And I could apply that to this case and say factual reality without the intangibles is a nightmare. The intangibles without the factual reality is a dream. We cannot live in dreamland, but we don't want to stay in a nightmare either. So we get the wrong picture of the culture in which our sons are growing if we ignore both the factual reality or if we only look at that factual reality. So what's the intangible aspect of reality that is not quantifiable, that is really hard to measure? Here are some ideas. One, you love your sons. You have a relationship with them by which you're attuned to their needs. You can look at their eyes and you know what they need. You look at their eyes and you know if they're happy or if they're not, if they're anxious or if they're at peace, if they want something. That is not quantifiable, but it's very real. You're predisposed as a parent to do what you need for their good. They have somebody in their lives who is willing to literally die for them, sacrifice whatever it takes. There's a crucial factor in your sons growing up, which is their deep-seated knowledge that they're loved. That's a powerful weapon. that's not quantifiable, but it can get your son to look at life in a way that, by just looking at facts of reality, doesn't seem to fit, but it does. Another intangible reality, your dedication to their well-being, how much you're willing to provide for their needs, the fact that you're here and you're not in the party room. No, nothing against the, nothing against the party room people. You guys are doing great too, I'm sure, right? Just stay off that table a little bit. The fact that you're here, the fact that you're listening, right? That you care that much, that you spend so much time. I remember talking to a single mom whose son was here at the Heights many years ago now. And when the boy graduated and went to college, she said, I'm going to go away for a weekend with a couple of friends because I haven't been by myself in 18 years. I have always been at home for him because there was no one else. You do the same. Teamwork very often because you have to, but the time that you spend with your children. Another intangible reality, your purposefulness. The fact that you know the challenges and what you want. The greatest trick the devil ever played is to make us believe that he doesn't exist, the usual suspects. We have good news. It's hard to ignore the devil these days, right? It's hard to say, no, I don't think he exists. We can't be that clueless. Another intangible, you have each other. You have mentors in your children's lives. You're not alone. You have a great team. Right? You're not doing this alone. You're doing this as part of a team. Institutions that are mission-aligned, dedicated, and purposeful. The institutions, schools like the Heights and other places, parishes, youth centers, mentors in your kids' lives, all these form a team that gives you the code. It's like knowing the enemy's communications before the battle. You can approach the battle with confidence because you've broken the code. That's what institutions and mentors help you with more than anything else. And finally, and let's not forget, God's grace. J.R.R. Tolkien wrote a letter to Michael Straight, who was the editor of the New Republic, about the success of Frodo, the little hobbit that destroyed the ring. And Tolkien said, actually, he did not succeed, he failed. If you remember, at the end of the story, he is not strong enough to destroy the ring. He's too addicted to it. But the point is this, is that he was incapable of succeeding. He was too small a being to be able to do what he was asked to do. And that's when the writer of the story, with capital S, comes in and provides a conclusion to the story that is successful, not only because of the action of this hobbit, but even in spite of his weaknesses. And that's the way our lives work. Are you capable, with your own efforts, to raise your children to be great men? No, you are not. Nobody can. That's way too challenging a task. It's way beyond what you can do as a parent. It's way beyond what we can do as educators. But we're now supposed to succeed, not on our own. We're supposed to fail on our own. But we're supposed to be close to the story writer so that he can conclude the story in the way he has intended for it to be concluded. So why does this matter? Well, it matters because ignoring the environment in which your sons grow without this intangible aspect of reality is coming up with a conclusion that is incomplete and therefore false. It'd be like saying, what's the temperature in Washington, D.C.? And we'll say it's about 34 degrees. I only look at 2 months, by the way, January and February. It may be accurate for January and February, but it's false because it's incomplete. It doesn't look at the whole year. The same thing as we view our environment. Optimism, then, is reality properly understood with its supernatural component. There's a famous meeting that happened between St. John Paul II, whose feast day we celebrated very recently, and Solzhenitsyn. And they had, I'm sure, a great conversation. I can't imagine what the conversation was like, right? And when Solzhenitsyn came out of that meeting, he said, I am utterly impressed by how much the Pope knows about everything that is going on in the world. He's aware of every problem in the world. But I'm much more impressed by the fact that, given how much he knows about what's going on in the world, how optimistic and hopeful he is. That's where we want to be. We want to be very knowledgeable of what's wrong with the world, and we want to be very optimistic that our sons can have a great experience in the world. On paper, our environment is corrosive and destructive. In reality, we have everything that we need to help your sons be great men. So what can we do to help you raise your boys to be hopeful and optimistic? Let's get down to some specifics. Well, to put it succinctly, what we have to do is create microcultures. We have a culture in the West, in the world, in the West, in the country, East Coast, and the DMV. There's a culture. And you and I know that this culture has many great components and very corrosive components at the same time. And it's a culture that you can't trust, right? You can't grab your baby and say, here, culture, teach him, because that's not going to work. So what we do is we create a microculture around him, a microculture that's going to be so powerful that your son will derive his understanding of reality from that microculture, while at the same time it will filter the outside culture. It's not going to isolate it. You don't want your son to be isolated. You just want him to receive some filtering. You don't want him away from the sun all the time. You just got to put some lotion on him so that he can enjoy without getting burned, right? That's a microculture. So here's some ideas of microcultures. First and foremost, the ultimate, most powerful microculture, the irreplaceable one, is your home. That's the most powerful, that's irreplaceable. The heights cannot replace your home microculture. We support and we help, but you guys are the kings of the castle. You guys are the ones who are destined. You guys are the Frodos in your children's lives, right? You're the ones who the story writer wants to make sure fail, and by doing that succeed in raising your children. So here's some ideas of creating this microculture at home. Be careful about complaining about things. We have become very habituated to complaining. Bad things that happen. We complain about the world, complain about the environment, we complain about people, we complain about whatever decision, whatever it might be. Be careful about complaining too much. Because when you complain about something that is happening in our culture, you have a context in which to put it. Your sons don't. Right? A complaint, one statement that is a complaint for you is part of many other conversations. For them, it's a big deal, a much bigger deal. Maybe you have to stop watching the news in their presence. It may be. Put something else in the car. Don't watch it at home. I haven't found a person who watches the news and comes out saying, geez, I feel so much better now. It's a real pick-me-up. Like, when I went down, I just watch the news and I come up thinking, man, the world is good, right? I'm ready for battle. Well, if you know that's not going to be the outcome, turn it off. Don't watch it, especially when your son is there, right? Watch it when you're by yourself and you have some time to decompress after you watch it. Also, we have to stop ourselves from talking like old people. And we all have the image when we were kids of thinking, oh, when I grow up, I'm not going to say that. And now you find yourself saying that, right? And the problem is, if you're like me, I think, yeah, but it has to be said, right? Which I'm sure what my parents thought when they said it. I saw a fellow down in Miami years ago who was past his athletic prime by several years and had just kind of let go of his appearance. and had a T-shirt that said, "The older I get, the better I was." I'm thinking, that's pretty good. Because I think we're all there too, right? Like, whatever we did when we were 20, all of a sudden it's much better than it was when we were 20, right? Because in our mind, it gets better every year. So be careful about being that guy who says, "Oh, the good old days. They were so much better." Listen to this characterization of children. "The children now love luxury. They have bad manners, contempt for authority. They show disrespect for elders and love chatter in place of exercise. Children are now tyrants, not the servants of their households. They no longer rise when elders enter the room. They contradict their parents, chatter before company, gobble up dainties at the table, cross their legs, and tyrannize their teachers." That was written by Socrates 2,400 years ago. I like to read it once in a while when people say, "Guess these days are really bad." I go, "Well, actually, it's not these days." As far as I can tell, they really haven't changed that much. As a matter of fact, they're getting much better. They do get up when somebody walks into the room, right? Pope Emeritus Benedict XVI said, "Only when the future is certain as a positive reality does it become possible to live in the present." Only when the future is certain as a positive reality, only when you can see the future as a certainty that you're going to attain and is a positive future, can you then live in the present. We have to be careful not to be too anxious ourselves. Sometimes we can get too anxious about what's going to happen to us, what's going to happen to our children. And that anxiety that might be a 4 out of 10 in me gets transferred to the young kid and becomes a 6 out of 10 or a 7 out of 10. I'm not a doctor. I don't know what to tell you about anxiety, but I know one thing, that we can all help ourselves a lot by taking care of our faith. I don't know what you do about anxiety other than dumping everything in the hands of the one who can actually do something about it. And every morning saying, "I'm yours. Take care of my family." And every evening, "Thank you for taking care of my family. Protect them tonight." And if we do that, not only are we praying for our children, but we're making ourselves much more capable of dealing with them in an optimistic and hopeful way. Another way to keep building this microculture at home is to be thankful for what we have. And I have to make sure, because I want to be thankful also, to quote the person in whose name this room is named, right? G.K. Chesterton. And he said, "You say grace before meals, all right. But I say grace before the concert and the opera, and grace before the play and the pantomime, and grace before I open a book, and grace before sketching, painting, swimming, fencing, boxing, walking, playing, dancing, and grace before I dip the pen in the ink." We say grace before meals. What about grace before walking across the street? Grace before turning the car on. Maybe grace after it turns on, if there's a problem, right? Grace when we make it through the beltway. Grace when we get to work. Grace when we see our children and you see them. Grace when you see your children and you want to strangle them. And you say grace because they have a neck to be strangled. And God gives you enough power not to strangle it, right, this one time. So that's the first one, is the microculture of the home. The second one is to condition their minds, to create a sphere of control and power and optimism in their minds. And I think one way to do this is by helping them, perhaps doing this with them, reading and studying history, so as to maintain a perspective on challenges. Begin by reading the Bible. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. Psalm 23. How good is that? Right? Think about that. Right, kid? Right? The Lord is our shepherd. There is nothing that we shall want. Lazarus, come out. The dead man came out. How powerful is that? Let your hearts not be troubled, neither let them be afraid. Whatever you ask in my name, I will do it. To read those words. Great news. Whatever you ask in my name, I will do it. Beyond the Bible, to read biographies and historical accounts, I have 4 examples here. One from a letter from Robert E. Lee to his wife after the death of his daughter. This is November 62. This is days before the Battle of Fredericksburg. Not a good time in his life. And he says, I cannot express the anguish I felt at the death of my sweet Annie. To know that I shall never see her again on earth, that her place in our circles, which I always hope one day to enjoy, is forever vacant, is agonizing in the extreme. But God in this, as in all things, has mingled mercy with the blow in selecting the one best prepared to leave us. May you be able to join me in saying, His will be done. What a perspective, right? At a time in a man's life when things are not going well and daughter dies and is writing to his wife to try to comfort her. His will be done. Or Winston Churchill's famous statement, a pessimist is one who sees the difficulty in every opportunity, but an optimist is one who sees the opportunity in every difficulty. A man who had many reasons to not be optimistic about the outcome of the war. Or the famous psychiatrist writer, Viktor Frankl, who survived a concentration camp and wrote a beautiful book, Man's Search for Meaning, in which he wondered, why is it that some people go into a concentration camp and they're physically very, very strong and they do not survive? And others go in, they're being physically much weaker and they do survive. What is the reason for survival? What is that power? And he concludes that the power is a desire to live for a specific reason. Those who went in there and they wanted to live because they had something to do, family to go to, some goal, they lived. Those who gave up mentally, who at some point realized, I can't do it, it's not worth it, this is too much, are the ones who died. Later he said, in modern society we have many men with means to live, but no meaning to live for. Fortunately, we have a lot of meaning to live for. And when you look at your children, you're filled with meaning. And finally, around the year 165, Rusticus, a Roman prefect, ordered a Christian philosopher, Justin, and several of his followers to sacrifice to the Roman gods. When they refused, he sentenced them to be scourged and beheaded. As they faced a gruesome death, St. Justin gave one of the greatest pep talks in the history of the world. He turned to his followers and said, they can kill us, but they can't do us any real harm. That's optimism. They can scourge us, they can behead us, they can kill us, but really they can't do that much to us. That's a man who understands the factual reality. The whips are there, the swords are there. They're going to a certain death. And yet he's optimistic because he sees the intangible reality. Yeah, the body is really not that important. We die for Christ, we're okay. They really can't do anything to us, no matter what they do. Another microculture is to provide a healthy peer group. I don't think you can choose your son's friends. You can't tell your son, you have to be friends with so-and-so, don't be friends with so-and-so. It is almost impossible to undo a friendship, and it's impossible to force a friendship, so you can't do that. But what you can do is put the right peers around your son. That is more your choice. Where you send him to school, what activities he participates in, what homes he visits, that is within your control, especially as they're younger. You can't choose who he's going to befriend, but you can put several people around him that you would like him to befriend. A teenager's mood is very affected by the group, whether he's trusting or cynical, respectful, disrespectful, cheerful, surly, optimistic, pessimistic. The group carries a lot of weight. It happens to a lot of us. I remember reading an experiment years ago where college students were brought into a room where there were 10 people, and 9 were part of the experiment, or the experimenters, and only 1 was the experiment. And when they came in, they saw a whiteboard with about 10 vertical lines. And 9 were exactly the same length, and 1 was just shorter. And the doctor asked the question, are all these lines the same length? And we started asking the 9 who were part of the experiment. And they all said, yes, they are, yes, they are, yes, they are, yes, they are. And they got to the 10th person, who was the only one who's been experimented on. And 80% of college students said, yes, they are, even though they clearly weren't. And only 20% said, no, I don't know what they're talking about. That one is shorter. And they would ask again, are you sure everyone sees it in the same way? Yes, I am sure it is shorter, right? But only 20% is the power of peer pressure. So we try to place people around your son who are going to tell the truth. We're not going to tell them, yeah, that line doesn't matter. It's the same length as the other ones. And you can encourage healthy fun with reasonable risks. It is safer for your son, early high school, even late middle school, to go on an overnight bike trip than for him to go to the basement for an hour with unfiltered internet. Encourage healthy fun. Let him go. Take some physical risks. Let him do something that he's going to come back and feel pretty cool about it, because the other kids are not doing that. And feeling the self-confidence, right, that he can do something that most people can't. The other microculture is to put the right mentors around your sons. Mentoring is a two-way relationship. Just like you can't force friendship, you can't force mentoring either. But you can put the right people around your son and hope that the relationship clicks. So it could be a relative, it could be an uncle, could be a teacher, a coach, people that you trust, people that you know are going to tell your son what you would tell him yourself. But besides that, I think you want to look at a mentor who is going to facilitate your son's life of virtue. So a mentor has a sense for a life of virtue. Not just a good pagan, although he may be a really good mentor as well, but somebody who's going to facilitate a life of virtue, who understands what a life of virtue is. There was a very significant study by Purdue University and Gallup, where they were trying to identify what are the reasons that college students are both successful professionally and successful personally. And they concluded that, and this may be a relief for those of you whose sons are applying to colleges, they concluded that where they went to university did not matter. Top university, community college, it didn't seem to make a difference. They concluded that what they studied didn't matter, right? Maybe some professions were more profitable at the very beginning, but eventually it didn't matter. There was not enough of a pattern. What mattered, the only thing that seemed to make a difference as to doing well professionally and personally, is college students who had a mentor while they were at the university, a professor that they went to outside of class, even though they were not taking his class anymore, a professor they would go and who would sit down and chat with them. And the reason for that is that those students felt much greater self-confidence because they felt this professor thinks highly of me. He thinks I'm going to do great things. He thinks I can do a lot of things. And as a result, they ended up doing great things and doing a lot of things. So optimistic mentors, right? Think of somebody in your son's life who is not you, in addition to you, who is going to provide that kind of mentoring. Somebody who really believes in your son, who really believes that your son is a really good man, and he's going to be a much greater man. And somebody that you can work together with. You can't work with your son's peers, right? You can't call your son's friends and say, hey, I want you to tell my son to, clean his room. Like, no, that doesn't work, right? But you can tell that to your brother. You can tell that to a teacher, a coach. Could you tell him to make his room at some point, to clean it up, if you find an easy way to say it? And there's also an easy way because boys are used to questions like, how's your room? Like, because everyone asks them how the room is. So they never think it's strange, and they can always tell you the truth, and the truth is always say, well, it could be better. Well, that's a good answer, right? That's anything from a battlefield to just a couple things on the floor. But at least the beginning of a conversation. So just to conclude, I think not only we can be, but I think we should be very hopeful and optimistic we have to be hopeful and optimistic in order to raise hopeful and optimistic young men. We all agree that the culture is not going to do it for us. But I hope we also agree that the culture is not going to prevent us from doing it either. If we set up these microcultures at home and in other places, even in their minds. I am very hopeful because over the last 20 years, even the last 40 years, I see that things are not getting worse. I don't think they're getting worse. I think the evil is becoming more apparent, and I think the good is becoming stronger. I see many more students here at the Heights who are trying to live good lives than ever before. I see your sons here at the Heights, and I think, I didn't know anybody like these kids when I was growing up. Like, I just didn't know them. I know kids who were okay, but I didn't know kids who were really, in some ways, heroically trying to live a good, virtuous life. And that's thanks to the microcultures that you have already developed in your homes, and that we're helping you develop here. I think we have to be thankful that the culture is the way it is, because it awakens in us a desire and a realization that we're here to form your sons. And therefore, they're going to be much better off because of that. So with that, I'll conclude the remarks, and I'll take whatever questions anybody has about hope and optimism or anything else that's somewhat related to it. I hope they're okay. I just have to get that in there, right? Thank you. Yes.
I have a question. I have a lot of experience. One of the parts of the topic that you mentioned with the mental health component, and it could be just my observation, but it seems as though children are even growing up these days with this sort of knowledge that they can psychologically trigger their parents in a way that I was either oblivious to or oblivious to, but growing up. But how do you sort of optimistically kind of reroute that when you kind of catch yourself going, oh, I'm feeding this, I'm playing into this really, like, feeling guilty, whether it's because, oh, I'm working, or I'm got put in this state to drive kids to school, so, like, I kind of feel like more divided, like I feel like I'm trying to answer many needs, and so when I pick up that my kids are kind of playing into that, how do you kind of like, I don't know, do you, like, not let your kids kind of play into that sort of psychological trap?
Yeah, no, yeah. So how not to give in to your kid's psychological trap into thinking that you're not fulfilling the many needs that they have, and therefore you're deficient and you create more needs. By the way, if when I repeat the question, it's a different question, do correct me, because I don't want to answer the question that I have. I want to answer the question that you have. So how not to give in to that? And I think a lot of it is having an anti-trigger mechanism in your mind. Like, what am I going to do? What am I going to do to slow myself down? Like, for instance, I know somebody who decided, every day on my way home from work, I'm going to pray this prayer card, that I may be the best mom this evening or the best dad this evening. It's something, right? Your mind is already turning into, okay, it's going to be an evening where there may be challenges, but I'm going to have God's grace. Or something that anti-trigger, like, I'm going to have, this thing is going to repeat myself. Like, I'm going to tell myself mentally, it's not a big deal. Every time that my kids bring anything up, I'm not going to tell them, I'm going to tell myself mentally, it's not a big deal, 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 right? As they keep talking. And then I'm going to meet them somewhere in the middle, between it's not a big deal and it's the end of the world. We're going to meet somewhere where we can actually, come up with a resolution. Something that I know helps other people is to say, when I begin the year, when I begin the month, I'm going to assume there are going to be 3 major things at home that are going to happen, and 7 other things. And 3 major, I mean, like the head scratchers, like, oh my gosh, what am I going to do about this? Because it seems to me that if you go into whatever situation expecting that there's going to be a lot of problems and challenges, you're much more optimistic through them because they're not unexpected, right? When they happen, well, of course, this is part of the plan, right? We knew there was going to be a problem. Now is here where I can excel, right? Here's where I do my best when those things come up. And whether that's true or not, it doesn't matter. If you tell yourself that you're going to do your best in those problems, you'll do much better than you would otherwise. So I think it's worth saying, even if you couldn't prove it, with enough hard evidence. So anyhow, those are some ideas that come to mind that maybe help. I know they have helped other people with similar situations. Yes.
So you mentioned filtering. I think, from my perspective, there are a lot of things as parents we should be on the lookout for filter today. Some of them are a lot more obvious, like hypersexualization, obvious.
Right.
Some are a little more seditious, like fear.
Mm-hmm.
So from your perspective, in your position, what are some of the key things you think parents should be on the lookout to filter?
Great. I think that a lot of the filtering could be seen from the angle of respecting the dignity of the person. I think if that's the angle that you have, right, like whatever my son sees and hears, however I talk to him, the angle is going to be, we always respect the dignity of the person. And that way you deal with matters of conscience, you deal with matters of sexuality, you deal with matters of loyalty, you deal with matters of charity and nobility. Like everything comes in that funnel, it seems to me. And it's just one way to think about it, right? Like whatever the interaction is, if you're at the grocery store, what's the best way to respect the dignity of the clerk? How I communicate with them. And you don't have to tell your son, be respectful to clerks. They see you, the way you greet them, right? The way you deal with them. When you open doors for people, everything that you do, I think with that in mind, it's a great filtering, it's a great funnel. Because otherwise, you're right, I think you just get overwhelmed by how many things there are. And at least it helps me to put it all in the same funnel and look at it from the same angle. I just find it just easier to be coherent about reactions that way. I can't quite see the room, so I don't know if I don't if I don't pay attention to you, don't take it personally. Yes.
You say that training a dog, you were actually training the owner of the dog. How many should we be looking at raising our sons as an education primarily for ourselves first?
Great question. Great question. It's interesting the way that Saint Josemaria describes schools. They say there are 3 communities in a school: parents, teachers, and students. And the order of importance is parents first, teachers second, students third. Counterintuitive, but I think you see the point from your question. Yes, if you parents are fully aligned with the mission of the school and you're trying to live a better life yourselves, your sons will invariably benefit. If the faculty here is trying to live a good life, your sons will benefit. Once you parents try to live good lives and we faculty are doing the same thing, educating your sons is a lot simpler. And it happens naturally. A lot of the education in optimism is going to happen in a very informal way. So, for instance, the way to see education is that you have three ways in which you educate. The first one is direct and planned. And that's when a teacher goes into a classroom, you have a curriculum, and you have material you want to get across. Or a coach goes on a field and he has a practice he wants to run. It's direct, face-to-face with the student, and there's a plan to it. And most people would say, that's what education is about. And here the Heights would say, well, that's part of it. The second way you educate is direct but unplanned. This is the education that takes place when you meet any student in the hallway, in the parking lot, on a field, after school, before school. And the way that works is that it makes a difference whether you cross paths with a student and make no eye contact, or you actually do make eye contact. And if you know his name, and you can say, good morning, John. And if you know something about him, you can say, hey, John, how's your grandmother? I know that she was sick. I've been praying for her. How is she? It takes half a second, but the education there is this person cares and this person loves me. That's where you excel as a parent, right? Once in a while, you're going to have those one-on-one conversations that you plan. 99% of the time is those interactions that you don't plan but happen all the time. And those interactions are such that you cannot fake them. You can't fake them. You can only be yourself. The only way they're going to work is by doing what you were saying. I got to take care of myself, right? I got to live in a certain way so that I interact with my son in that way. So I think you're right. Is parents really, it's you guys here, us here, who really are training ourselves, self-training for the benefit of your sons. Good question. Yeah.
Wonderful. Well, Alvaro, thank you very much. In the absence of any other questions, I invite you all to join us in the front of the school for more conversation and refreshment. Colin Gleason, November 13th, on disciplining our younger sons and creating homes where we have respectful dominion. But once again, Mr. Vicente, thank you, and hope to see you all soon.
Great. Thank you.